Hi, everyone, for being here. Thank you for coming. This is a really nice turnout for our first School of Sustainability seminar of the semester. I'm really excited to introduce to you Elke Kellner. She is a faculty associate in the School of Sustainability. She's been a Marie Curie Fellow here at ASU since 2022. And looking at research on the transformation of social ecological systems towards sustainability. And today herself and a few students, including one student online who is in Australia, will be presenting on some of the governing of conflict and trade-off situations over 2 years of empirical research. So we're really excited to have you here with us. Thanks.
So thank you very much, and a very warm welcome from my side. It's really a pleasure, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces. It makes me also very nervous, to be honest, to know so many people in the audience. So it's really nice to see so many colleagues here from ASU. And then also, it's so nice to see my neighbors here, my friends from my neighborhood. It's so nice that you're interested in my research and take the time. And then also a friend from my fitness is here, which is also a very important part of my life here in Arizona. So thank you for coming to all of you. And yeah, today I want to present my empirical insights from the last 2 years. It was a very interesting journey for me, and it comes to an end. I will leave Arizona next Tuesday. So it's really my final presentation now. And yeah, that makes me also a little bit nervous, but we will go through. So perhaps some of you don't know my background. So I thought very quick, I only want to mention that I started as a biochemist. I'm also a mother of 3 children. And after a while or a long time in the natural sciences, I was more and more interested in sustainability. And I studied again, and I did a bachelor in sustainability. Based on that, I did my PhD in climate science from a human geography perspective. And I did that in Switzerland. And then I also did a postdoc in Switzerland. And yeah, now I'm here at ASU with my Marie Curie Fellowship from the European Commission. Okay, in my research in general, I want to give you first a little bit of a background. So I'm in general very interested to build knowledge about governance processes to balance trade-off situations. So in general, I'm interested in improving sustainable development of social ecological systems. I'm also interested, and this is really important for me usually, to bring knowledge into action by designing research through co-production processes. So doing transdisciplinary research together with stakeholders, and also to inform decision makers and stakeholders. But that was a little bit challenging, that part in the US, and we will come to that in a second. So what are trade-off situations? Because that is my main focus, and I want to give you some information on that. I think many or most of you know we have the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and also we have goals to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change. That means, and this is the Paris Climate Agreement. So there are some trade-off situations. They are within and between the SDGs, but also between the Paris Climate Agreement and the SDGs. So what do I mean? To give you an example, you can see here a huge solar farm in California. It's in the, I forgot to ask how to pronounce it, Mojave Desert, or so I'm still learning all these terms. So, and this is very important for mitigating climate change. I mean, this is the production of renewable energy. On the other side, this could be a threat to some endangered species. For example, this is also a very difficult word for me, the desert tortoise. I don't know, I'm still learning these terms. And so from a sustainable development and SDG perspective, solar farms are important, and in Greece, the production of renewable energy. So that means SDG 7. And on the other side, it is a threat to SDG 15, which is life on land. So that is an example for a trade-off situation. And to make it a little bit more interactive, I thought, please talk to your neighbor now for 1 or 2 minutes and think about a trade-off situation which you know or which you have experienced or you can imagine. Which trade-off situation can you think about when you think about the SDGs? You have 1 or 2 minutes. Also with my students later. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I would be very interested to hear your experience and your ideas. I hope we have later on time during the when they provide some food, perhaps we can exchange a little bit. But now we want to go on a little bit with our presentation, and yeah, so I hope that connected a little bit what we are talking today about. So from a scientific perspective, more and more scholars talk about and study the synergies and trade-offs within the SDGs, but also within SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. So where's the research gap? So we know a lot about that there are synergies, there are trade-offs, but how can we govern them? How can we balance these trade-off situations? And I'm really interested in the decision-making and in the processes and how the people come together and make informed decisions to improve sustainable development. And I use different frameworks in my research, and I don't want to go today in this talk too much in depth about frameworks, but I only want to give you a short overview how I study my case studies, so in particular the empirical case studies. So as I mentioned before, I'm really interested in trade-offs between economic, or I focus here, let's say in the US, in my case studies on trade-offs between economic issues, ecological issues, and also social and cultural. So that means in all of my case studies are indigenous communities involved, and that makes it a little bit more complicated, which we will see later. And I'm interested about the governance approaches and how these actions and processes, action situations lead to collective action for sustainable development or not. And to study that, I also study the contextual factors. So for example, the biophysical conditions. And so we need to understand whether are there some resources, for example, are there copper resources or gas and oil or whatever, but also the socioeconomic conditions. So what are the opportunities for tribal communities to find a job, to find income, things like that. And then we also study institutional conditions. That means all the rules. So they regulate and shape these action situations. So what are the rules in use, the formal ones, but also the informal ones? And then at the end, we look at it through the lens of sustainable development or also through the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And I use, and we all use quality in my students, I will introduce them in a minute. We use qualitative methods. and we use case study approaches. We do single case studies or also comparative case studies. And for that, we do semi-structured interviews with stakeholders, NGOs, politicians, and so on, and transcribe the interviews, code them, and we code also documents. And then we do a qualitative content analysis. And here we come to the first challenge for me, which I observed here. I didn't got the IRB permission, so the Institutional Review Board permission from the university to conduct interviews with Indigenous people. And I can understand that, and it's really challenging because it's important to build long-standing relationships and to build trust with Indigenous communities before you do an interview. So that is not possible for me as a 2-year visiting scholar. That is too short. But on the other side, I miss now an important voice in all of my case studies. And what is a strategy to overcome that? And I learned that in particular from David, to do interviews with boundary organizations. So that means NGOs who work for a long time together with the Indigenous communities and could build these relationships and trust. But beside collecting data during my fieldwork, I collected also many other insights. And I would also give you a little bit of insights about that, because it's not always, when you do empirical research in a new country, it's not always about data for your research. It's also, it gives you a lot of inspiration. And so I could get a lot of inspiration for future research, but also for my private life. And that is really also an important part. And I enjoyed that very much, or still enjoy it. I also learned how to survive the heat. In the beginning, I started to do more than 20 interviews around Tucson with retired persons, and they lived all around in these huge houses around Tucson. And I was going with my bike, and I thought, yes, I do that with my bike, of course. From Switzerland, I'm used to use always my bike, but then, yeah, there were some challenges with the heat, but I learned to survive that also. And not only the heat was a challenge, it was also the extreme cold weather was also a challenge. And to be honest, I would never sleep in my tent with 10 Fahrenheit in Switzerland. But when I first visited one of my case studies, Grand Canyon, in March 2022, it was very, very cold. But I survived, and I was in Grand Canyon several times, and also in the beginning of this month again. And I asked for backcountry permission and to hike down in the Grand Canyon. They said, oh, that's a funny question. There's a snowstorm tomorrow. But I thought, yes, I will do that. I want to have that experience too. So that is the second picture. And that was really impressive. So all the clouds and the snow, and it was so different than when it's really nice weather and the heat. However, most of the fun is to do fieldwork together with my students. And we have one of her here. This is Katie Spreitzer. And she's a student and also an honor student from the School of Sustainability here at ASU. And we had a lot of fun during our fieldwork in Chaco culture. And on the picture, you can also see Brian O'Neill. He was also with us. And we made a lot of photos and videos, and we will see that later on when we show part of the video. So, and Katie is also just perfect in doing pancakes in the morning for breakfast. And then also we sit in the evening together at the fire. And I learned a very important thing, what I didn't know before, is to eat s'more. So, and not only to eat, also to produce. And that is also really important to survive fieldwork and the other side things. So, important part of my research. And then I have my wonderful group of SURE students, and 2 of them are here today, and one is online because she is in Australia currently. And we went together to the Grand Canyon and doing some field work there, and we had a lot of fun and camped at the campground there. And yeah, this is Jessica Simon from the School of Sustainability. And then we have Kaylee Brown. She's doing an internship currently. She couldn't come. Then we have Emmeline Meyer from Australia. She is joining online. We will see her later. And then we have Sydney Lewis, also from the School of Sustainability. And she's also now, she's doing her honor thesis also with me currently. So, and I also want to mention that Emmeline and Sydney got the Student of the Year award in the SURE project from the School of Sustainability. So last but not least, there's also one man contributing to my research project, and this is Ty Köster. He's at University of Arizona in Flagstaff. So now we come to some insights of the case studies, and we start in New Mexico, then we go over to Arizona, and then we finish in Utah with the Bears Ears National Monument. And I start with the Chaco Culture National Historical Park in New Mexico. Perhaps some of you know that place. It's a fascinating place. It's a historical park. And that means the ancestral Pueblos have built great houses more than 1,000 years ago. And all over at that place are these really fascinating great houses. What is also very important is that all these buildings are oriented to the solar and the lunar cycle. And there are also inter-building alignments. And so that is really important. And also the ceremonies and everything is related to the sun and the moon. So only to give you a little bit of some an impression how it looks like there. But now what is the trade-off situation? We want to talk about the trade-off. And then perhaps you know, this is in the Four Corner region. So we have, it's very close to Colorado, but also to Arizona and Utah. And in that region is a lot of oil and gas production. That means the BLM, so Bureau of Land Management, leased more than 90% of their land for oil and gas production. That is the blue-colored land. And they come closer and closer to the national park because with new methods like fracking, they can now, it's more economically efficient also to drill in that region. And that is a threat to the national park. You can imagine, in particular, fracking, which could lead to earthquakes, that would be really a threat to the ruins. And so they implemented a 10-mile buffer zone around it, and you can see the red circle around it. And to understand a little bit more the difficulties here, on the right side, you see now it zooms in to the in the buffer zone area. Again, the purple in the middle is the national park. And we see now there are a lot of different property rights. So the yellow is the federal land. Then we have some pieces of state land of New Mexico, private land, and then a lot of Navajo land, which is in that case called allotment, because these are small pieces of land and the Navajos are the owner of it and they call themselves as allottees. So, and so there's a huge conflict between the allottees, the Navajo allottees who have the land there. And as you can see and read on the t-shirt, they stand for oil and gas development. Some of them, we have to say. So they want to lease their land. And it's, yeah, when we see the region, it's really, there are not a lot of job opportunities. It's a very important source of income for them to lease the land for oil and gas development. On the other side, we have the tribes like the Hopi, the Sunni, and the Pueblo who are connected to the ruins, still use it for rituals and ceremonies, and they, of course, support the buffer zone. There's a conflict also between the tribes. Last but not least, there's another conflict on the top because who's making the decision about the buffer zone? This is the US Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, and Deb Haaland is the first Native American secretary, and she has also, her ancestors are also Pueblans. So they also, this is also a conflict that the Navajo, some of them say like, she's not the right person, she's biased to do that decision. So it is really a very conflict situation. But last summer, they implemented it. She made the decision together with Biden. And now there is the, they implemented the buffer zone. And to give you a little bit, some insights of the different perspectives, Katie produced this wonderful video. And that is really, we only can see 2 minutes today, but it's uploaded on my website. And yeah, please have a look. It's really a wonderful here and to spend some time during the day, but also during the night.
buffer zone aims to withdraw public land from new oil and gas leasing and mining claims within a 10-mile radius of the national park for 20 years. In the following, voices in support of the buffer zone are in yellow, voices against the buffer zone are in red.
Chaco Canyon is a sacred place that holds deep meaning for the indigenous peoples whose ancestors lived, worked, and thrived in that high desert community.
Protection of sacred sites ensures that our indigenous way of life continues to the next generation. We must protect Chaco Canyon and end our addiction to the extraction industry.
Greater Chaco Canyon is of enormous significance to those even beyond the Southwest. Since 1987, UNESCO has listed Chaco as a World Heritage Site. Chaco is an ancient urban ceremonial center that is unlike anything constructed before or since.
The bill would put limits on my mineral rights and the mineral rights of thousands of Alatis. While the bill claims not to affect my mineral rights, in fact, many Alati lands are surrounded by federal lands that would be withdrawn by this bill. If BLM lands are withdrawn around our allotments, that means oil and gas companies cannot access our lands because they won't be able to access the federal lands. This is a steadfast personal property right that sustains our livelihoods and way of life. This would put many of our mineral rights off limits and stop a much-needed source of income to feed, shelter, clothe, and protect our families. I'm not exaggerating the importance of this income. In 2015, the Federal Indian Minerals Office distributed $96 million to 20,835 Alatis. That's a significant source of income in an area that continues to struggle with unemployment. I too care deeply about the Chaco culture heritage. Any development on my minerals and the minerals of other Alatis is done in strict accordance with the Act to make sure they are protected. Not only do we insist upon it, but that is the law of the land.
Yeah, sorry to stop the video, but I hope you can have a look at it. It's really wonderful. Thank you very much. And yeah, there are different governance approaches which they took, but at the end, the most important one is that they started a participatory process also together with the indigenous communities. And it's called Honoring Chaco, to find solutions and to build visions for the future. And they implemented the buffer zone, but this is only for 20 years. And then there are also some activities to protect the whole area, that it's not only for 20 years. But this is still ongoing. So I think that case shows a kind of a balance because they protect only the federal land, only on federal land, gas and oil development is not allowed, but on the other land, it is still allowed. In particular, what is important on Navajo land, they can still lease their land. So yeah, this is, to say it now, it's the only case where we think this is a kind of balance. We don't see any other balance of trade-off situations in the other cases. So coming now to a little bit a different topic is energy transition, because some of the next case studies are more linked to energy transition. And as you know, low carbon technologies play an important role for energy transition. However, they need a lot of minerals. So if you think about batteries for electric cars or solar panels and so on, they all need a lot of minerals. And if we want to limit the global warming to 20 degrees, which is one of the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, we need 4 times more minerals in 2040. If we want to have net zero by 2050, we need 6 times more minerals in 2040. And because of the current really low recovery and recycling rate, it is expected that we need much more minerals from new mining and also from, of course, current mining activities. There was a study last year in Nature Sustainability about the new mining projects for extracting minerals for energy transition. And what they could show here, these are scholars from Australia, and they showed that more than 50% of the new proposed mines globally are on indigenous land or on land which is important for indigenous communities. And I think that is really important to see that. And kind of good news is that 70% of these projects are in their initial planning phase. So there is still time to improve policies and governance processes. And this is also a high motivation for me for this research, because at the UN summit in New York last year, also indigenous world leaders won and talked about it. Of course, this is again a Western scientific knowledge climate strategy, and it's a kind of green colonialism. If you think about, okay, we want to have the mitigate climate change, but we need the minerals from indigenous land. So this is again a trade-off situation, as you can see, energy transition versus justice for indigenous communities. And we have here governance paradox. We need a rapid intensification on the one side of mineral extraction to meet this high international demand. On the other side, we need long-lasting participative processes to find good solutions, just solutions with the indigenous communities. And with that, I hand over to Sydney, and because she's studying the Resolution copper mine, which is very close here, 1 hour drive from Phoenix.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Elke. So as Elke mentioned, I am studying the Resolution copper mine for my senior thesis. So just to give a brief overview, the Resolution mine is a proposed underground copper mine that is currently being developed in Tonto National Forest near the town of Superior, Arizona, which is about an hour east of Phoenix. Now, this mine is expected to support up to 3,700 jobs and to produce up to 25% of the US copper demand each year. And just to give a brief background of the history, in 2014, a land exchange bill was approved in Congress that essentially authorized a land transfer between the site of the proposed mine called Oak Flat and conservation lands around Arizona. However, this site called Oak Flat holds spiritual significance for several Native American tribes. It's also considered a world-class rock climbing destination, and it is popular for other recreational uses like hiking and camping. So here's just an image of a poster that is currently located at the Oak Flat campground. It says, "Protect Oak Flat, Holy Land." All right, so next on this slide, I just wanted to walk through some of the major benefits and areas of controversy for this mine. So as I briefly mentioned on the first slide, the mine is expected to have significant economic benefits. This will, create jobs and generate tax revenues, as well as increase spending in local communities. Similarly, as we discussed earlier, this domestic copper production will represent a significant contribution to the energy transition. However, on the other hand, the mining method that is going to be used for this mine, which is called block caving, it's essentially going to create this 2-mile crater at the site of Oak Flat and essentially obliterate the entire site. There are fears that many cultural artifacts from Native American tribes will be lost due to this mining method. And then as well, there are concerns about, the Native Americans' connection to this land and how that will impact tribal values. Another issue is that the mine is going to use about 40,000 acre-feet of water each year, which is about the same amount that the city of Tempe uses. In addition, the use of the block caving mining method is going to eliminate public access to recreation opportunities at Oak Flat and result in adverse impacts to biological resources in the area. And then finally, due to the block caving mining method, the tailings from the mine will be stored behind a dam. And despite federal regulations, there is a low but existing risk of a potential tailings failure in which the dam collapses, and that would result in significant harm to local communities in terms of public health and safety. All right. Okay.
Yes, and then next is. Thank you very much, Sydney. It's really a wonderful work and very interesting insights. And you are doing a lot of interviews currently. That is really interesting. Thank you. And next we come to the next case study, which is done by Emmeline Meyer. She's now online. And Sydney Lewis again. This is but Emmeline is now presenting.
Hello. Yes, I am an ASU student. I'm currently studying abroad in Sydney, Australia. So I'm coming to you from 18 hours in the future. I'm going to share a bit of info with you about Pinyon Plain Mine, which is the case study that Sydney and I have been working on for the past year. All right, so, you can go back one slide. So this is the Pinyon Plain Mine. It's located just 30 miles south of the Grand Canyon. We actually had the opportunity to visit there during our case study field trip this past March. And you're looking at the impoundment pond of the mine, which I'll talk about in a second. Go on. So like I said, Pinyon Plain Mine is a 17.4 acre uranium mine located just 10 miles south of the Grand Canyon. This mine went through a bunch of approval processes with the United States Forest Service when it was established in 1984. And it's located on the Red Butte Traditional Cultural Property, which is the sacred land of the Havasupai tribe, whose reservation is located 30 miles away from the mine's property. And this mine also shares the deep Redwell Mauve aquifer, also called the R aquifer, with the Havasupai tribe. That's their sole source of drinking water. And it also uses the shallower Coconino aquifer called the C aquifer. So since the mine presents a bit of a risk to the Havasupai tribe's drinking water, and it's also standing on their cultural property, the Havasupai tribe, as well as a number of advocates, have gone through a number of federal lawsuits filed against the United States Forest Service. And up till now, they've always been ruled in favor of the U.S. Forest Service. And until December 2023, the mine was actually not producing or selling any uranium ore due to its lack of profitability. But in December 2023, the mining company Energy Fuels started mining here. Yeah, another picture of the mine. So these are some of the trade-off situations that are involved with this mine. So proponents of the mine would say that the uranium produced here can be used to create uranium fuel, nuclear fuel, and nuclear energy, which aligns with the United States goal to shift from fossil fuels to zero carbon or clean energy. And also, since the US currently purchases most of its uranium from Russia and Kazakhstan, which may not be politically and economically viable sources in the future, this would enable our nuclear independence if we're able to produce more uranium domestically and use it for our own nuclear supply. And since this mine will produce about 60 jobs at peak production, this will economically stimulate the nearby towns of Tucson and Williams. Opponents of the mine would say that the mine presents a threat to the Havasupai tribe's cultural heritage. Since it is located on their cultural property of Red Butte, the tribe is less able to access this site when they're performing religious ceremonies there. And also since it poses a threat to their deeper R aquifer, this is a risk to their health. And in 2016, as the mining company was digging the mine shaft at this site, they actually pierced the shallow Coconino aquifer and leached uranium and arsenic into that water supply. Luckily, it didn't touch any of the Havasupai's water, but in the future, if mining activities were to pierce the deeper aquifer, this would contaminate their water supply and make them unable to get a good source of clean water. And additionally, since this is a risk to the water supply in the shallow aquifer and the deep aquifer, the local wildlife have been known to come near this area and drink from the impoundment pond, which you saw in a couple slides ago. They would break into the mine site through holes in the fence and drink the water. And additionally, since the shallow aquifer was pierced during mining activities in 2016, the company had to release a spray of the water into the air to get rid of all of the arsenic and uranium. So this has caused some detrimental effects to the local plant life. And since this is located in a national forest in Arizona, there are a lot of native species that can't be found elsewhere. So this is definitely a risk to local wildlife and plant life. So as you can see, this is a very complex trade-off situation dealing with, a shift to clean energy, but also potentially stripping away rights from an Indigenous tribe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for zooming in from Australia. And yeah, thank you to Sydney and Emmeline. Great work, really, and very important work also. And with that, we come now to our next case study. And as mentioned before, Kaylee can't do that, but Jessie will now present it for both of you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, as Elke mentioned, my name's Jessie Simon, and our next case we're going to get into is helicopter flights in the Grand Canyon that I studied alongside my partner, Kylie Brown. Perfect. So with over 5 million visitors each year, you can imagine that the Grand Canyon has become a really big hub for the tourism industry. And one of the industries not missing out on this opportunity is helicopter tourism. So there are more than 300 helicopter flights daily at the Grand Canyon on the west side during the peak season. And due to federal regulations that are put in place by the Federal Aviation Administration and National Park Service, flights are not allowed to land on Grand Canyon National Park land, but they are permitted to land outside of park boundaries and also on tribal lands surrounding and within the Grand Canyon. So 2 of the tribes in the canyon that are currently running some helicopter tours are the Hualpai and the Havasupai, and they're affected both environmentally and financially by these regulations that are put in place. And we specifically honed in on the Hualpai tribe because back in 2003, the Hualpai session was passed that allows for them to fly unlimited air flights on their land, which has contributed to why there are so many daily currently taking place. And this is just an example of they're really in the canyon, like as close as they could be. So that's on Hualpai land there. But some of the operators that are not Hualpai owned, but have contracted with the tribe. So this is a really good loophole for outside and private companies to also be involved in the helicopter tourism. And so some of the trade-offs we're seeing here, some proponents would say that this has helped alleviate some of the poverty that was previously in the area that the Hualpai tribe was facing because of all this economic opportunity that the helicopter tours have brought. It has also affected SDG number 8 and brought some jobs to the area, as well as economic growth from all the visitors that have taken helicopter tours that have then stayed overnight at hotels or local restaurants, or just stimulate the economy of the local region, as well as the Hualpai tribal land. And then we also identified SDG number 10 here as that has helped to reduce some of the inequalities that the Hualapai tribe was facing, which is why the accession was passed back in 2003 to begin with. And as you might imagine, there are some negative environmental effects from 300 helicopter tours running daily. And we have identified SDG number 13, climate action here, because as most of us know, the carbon emissions are not good for our planet. And with this many helicopter tours running every day, it is impacting, helping to drive some of the negative impacts of climate change, as well as SDG number 15. Back in 2015, an environmental impact study was performed on the area and has found that the noise pollution from the helicopter tours does affect animal migration patterns as well as stress levels of animals in the area. So I think Ted Quasala from the Hualapai tribe could sum up this situation best by saying, although the employment opportunities at Grand Canyon West have been good for the tribe, we still have many of the same problems as before: diabetes, suicide, and crime. As you can see, this has put a Band-Aid over a larger issue in a lot of ways, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jessica. And yeah, for me, it's amazing. These are SURE students, and Katie was an honor student, and they did so much work, and we are still working together. We are currently writing peer-reviewed scientific article, and that is wonderful to have so really very engaged students with so much motivation, and that also always motivated me very much in my work. So thank you very much also to Emily online, still collaborating with you. So we have, as always in these presentations, we're running out of time. So I have to shorten a little bit the last case study because we also want to discuss a little bit and give you a chance to ask questions. So the last, with the last case study, we are going to Utah, to the Bears Ears National Monument. I don't know whether you know that National Monument, and I do that work together with Ty Koester, as mentioned before, from University of Arizona. Perhaps a little bit of the history. So this is very unique. This is the only protected area, or now, no, it changed. It was the only protected area which has a co-management between the US government and a tribal coalition. So they built an inter-tribal coalition of 5 different tribes and tried to protect their ancestral homelands. And then in the last year of Obama, he designated it as a national monument, but then directly 1 year later, President Trump reduced the monument by 85%. And then one of his first actions was of President Biden was to restore the boundaries, and he also included some additional land. But there are still lawsuits against the designation. And it is, again, an area where it is environmentally very important, but also historically, cultural. There are a lot of cultural sites, as this is a kiva, which is underground, and a lot of ruins from the tribes, again, more than 1,000 years ago from the ancestral Pueblons. Only to give you a little bit of an impression. And then the trade-off situations is with some mining activities, and then also with ranging, and then also with these off-road vehicles. And I was there also several times, and that is crazy to see. They drive everywhere, even though it's now protected, and it should be a little bit less. And this is also a huge group which is fighting against the national monument, so the off-road groups. And the governance approach, so we have now this designation of the land as a national monument, depending for how long, but currently it is designated and protected in a way, and we have the co-management, but it is also not really a balance of a trade-off situation. To protect the land is then, and I will come to that on my next slide now, why I think it's not really a balance. Because when we think about other national monuments which were designated by President Biden this year, So for example, in March, he designated the Avi Kwa Ame National Monument in Nevada. And also in August, he designated the national monument around Grand Canyon. And so we see now it's a kind of similar governance approach now, which pops up that they build coalitions and the tribal communities, and then they work together to protect their homelands. But when we think about that, and to go, for example, to that case study in Nevada, there were 2 projects proposed, one huge wind energy project and one solar project, and they couldn't be implemented now because of the designation. So that is why we discuss it like, okay, is that really a balance? Because it's not only that we prohibit the bad mining, let's say, but also perhaps something what would be good for climate change. So this is still really a trade-off, and protection means, yes, that is important for the justice for indigenous communities. And then what does it mean, for example, in that case, for renewable energy? So this is really the difficulty of that. And so what we can see in all of these case studies is balancing trade-off situations is really challenging. The governance of that is also demanding. And if indigenous land involved, it is even more challenging. Because from my case studies in Switzerland, I know if they want to build a new hydropower dam, for example, they can do some compensatory measures. It's very easy. They negotiate, they sit together with the environmental NGOs, they find solutions. But what is if it's on indigenous land and it's sacred land? You can't do land exchange or something with indigenous sacred land, or compensatory measures doesn't help if you destroy the land. So I think that is much more challenging, and really, what are good solutions? And I hope we will have a little bit of time to discuss that also. When we look from different perspectives, to sum up now all these case studies, to give a little bit an overview. When we think about a justice for indigenous people like SDG 10, SDG 16, what does it mean? What can we learn from these case studies? So if it is on indigenous land, usually the US government decides in a way that, yes, we can say there is some kind of justice for indigenous people. For the buffer zone, perhaps you can remember they are still allowed to lease it for oil and gas development, and helicopter overflights are allowed on reservation land. If it's on land for indigenous, which is important for indigenous people, but it's not on their own land, then there's no justice, we could say, because yeah, the resolution copper mine is not at the end, but yeah, that's a preliminary result, let's say. So then it's really difficult. But if they use this governance approach and proactively fight for a designation for as a national monument, then we can see, yes, there is, we could judge it as justice for indigenous people. What does that mean from an environmental perspective? We always have to differentiate here between the local resource system when we think about the environment, and then the global resource system like climate change. So when we look from the local resource system, whether the governance approaches protect the local resource system, there's a kind of pattern what we can see in these case studies. So if it's on protected land, they protect it. I mean, very simple conclusion, and that's also hopefully what happens, because therefore we protect the land, or they protect the land that they protected. So then it's good for SDG 6 and 15. And then what does that mean for climate change? I would say we can't see any pattern, because that is a mix of, sometimes it looks like, I mean, resolution copper mine, of course, if they would extract copper there, that would be good for energy transition and also for climate change. Helicopter overflights for sure are not good for climate change, and so on. So there's not really a clear pattern. So coming to our main conclusion is, yeah, if we think of justice for indigenous people, it seemed to be a really good strategy to build coalition, intertribal coalitions. It gives them much more power. The US government has one agency to talk to. That's also what I hear in my interviews. They don't want to it's really difficult, as in the Chaco case, when the tribes have conflicts between them. So this gives them much more power. And then if they fight for it in a way that they proactively designate the land which is important for them as a national monument, for example, then it helps. On the other side, if you think about climate change, to protect land as a national monument or national park, as we can see, it has some challenges. If it's oil and gas leasing, it may be good for climate from a sustainability perspective. If it's renewable energy production or mining of transition minerals, it gets really complicated. And I think we have no single, not an easy answer. So coming back to that means it is really challenging, and to balance that these different dimensions is very, we still, I think, what can we do? What are solutions for that? And I think we are here at the School of Sustainability, and we should develop some ideas also what are good solutions, or perhaps you already have some in mind. And I would like to start the discussion also now in the last minutes about that. And therefore I thought that helps a little bit to structure perhaps our discussion also this figure again, because we see if the socioeconomic conditions are really bad for tribal communities, then this is another contextual factor which we have to keep in mind, or if it's really important sacred land and so on. So what means collective action for sustainable development in all these cases? That is, for me, a really important question. And we can link that, of course, with all the SDGs, with SDG 1, no poverty, and then ecologically, of course, with clean energy on the global level, life on land locally, and then social and cultural gets really complicated. On the one hand, it's about inequalities, peace, justice, and on the other side, protecting the land for cultural issues. This is again something different. And as we could see in the Chaco case, this is also a trade-off between that. And with that, I would really like to thank you, and I'm happy that you're all here today. Thank you very much. And also thank you for my students. And I will put it back that perhaps that helps to structure the discussion, but feel free first to have some questions. And please come, that we can answer together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please come to the front. I will run the microphone around to anyone who has questions. We'll take 5 or 10 minutes. And then remember, there's some snacks at the back here for after, not in the room, outside the room. If you want to hang around and talk to Elke and her students more to keep discussing. So any questions? Sure.
Regarding the biophysical conditions, what might be done relative to making the extraction safer environmentally, if that was going to happen?
Perhaps do you also want to answer with a method? I think that's a good idea, with the block caving or another method. I think that would be a good, yeah. Can we have the microphone? Oh yeah, here we can. Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting about the resolution case is that there are multiple mining methods that could be used to extract the copper. So there are 2 options that have been widely discussed for this case. Block caving, which I mentioned previously, and that's the method that's currently being used. And then there's also cut and fill, which is an alternative method that's commonly been used in the Copper Triangle region. The cut and fill method would actually have far fewer consequences for the environment. For example, if cut and fill were to be used, then Oak Flat would not be completely obliterated, and the site would be preserved for rock climbing groups, and it would also have fewer impacts to cultural resources. However, the block caving method is being used. It was selected by the company because it's more profitable. So unfortunately, it's like in this case, they did have multiple options, but they ended up going with the option that would be, most economical.
First, great presentation, and thanks for doing this great work. So I have a question, and then I'll give a brief context. So in this work, both in the process and outcomes, how are you operationalizing different forms of social and political power? So an example being the function of settler colonialism as a practical and theoretical notion. So practically, federal, state, and Navajo private land rights are grounded in policies like the Morrill Land Grant Acts of 1862 and 1890 that allowed the United States to build federal institutions, universities, I should say, university institutions, and then acts like the Dawes Act, a big policy that contributed to the allotments of land. Settler colonialism is also a theoretical implication. So Patrick Wolf cites it as a logic of elimination. So to colonize, it means to eliminate, not just replace. So back to my main question, how are you thinking about power dynamics? Maybe you're thinking about settler colonialism specifically, maybe other dynamics, and or maybe you didn't really consider them for a reason. So thoughts on that? Thank you.
I can start and then you can go on if you want. And also Emmeline, please feel free to answer. Yeah, thank you very much. A very important question. And yeah, to make it clear from the beginning, I don't use any colonialistic perspectives or colonialism theories in my research. Yeah, I'm still thinking about, because I want to go further with this, these kind of research, in particular with the mining and on indigenous land. And I think I should shift a little bit and integrate that in my next work. But we didn't integrate any these theories or perspective in our research currently. And of course, power plays an important role. And also one of the main, we didn't present that today, but one of the main reasons for the pinion plane mine and also for the helicopter flights, we rooted back to exactly that time where they lost a lot of land because they had to move into the reservation land, and then which was much smaller than before, and then they lost more or less all the opportunities to produce income or to do what they have done before, also their agricultural practices and so on. But perhaps also, Emmeline, perhaps do you want to answer that? I mean, you know a lot, or Jessie, I mean, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure, I can jump in a little bit. So I would say with regards to power dynamics, we did look a little bit at how power kind of created power within, I guess, the United States federal government, like Elke said, like issuing the reservations to the indigenous tribes, how that has kind of structured this economic disparity and land disparity over time. So that's definitely played a big role in that. But I would really say that it really comes down to the governance processes that are currently in place as to why, for example, the Pinion Plain Mine is still allowed to operate. It's going back to the fact that activities like mining that are going to cause economic profit for the country and for mining groups, those immediately take precedence over any personal, being able to exist on the land. It's always going to be more important for mining to happen than for the indigenous tribes to be able to use their land as they should be.
Yeah, do you want to?
Perfect. Yeah, I think kind of building off what Emmeline said, in our case particularly, we were also interested in looking at the governance processes and who has the authority or who had the authority to give the qualified that exception, and can they take that away? And after reading through some legal documents, the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Park Service, like I mentioned, have to agree upon that and to give them that exception and consult with the tribe. But there's no type of language about consent or anything like that from the tribe. So essentially they could take that exception away from the tribe if they wanted to. So I think that was really telling. Also, their reasoning behind, a lot of the reasoning behind giving the Hualapai that exception to fly as many flights as they want is because they were at such a low economic point, even compared to other tribes in the area when they, in the early 2000s, when they originally established that exception. But I think, I don't know, to me, I'm just always questioning the intention. And I think that is something we all were kind of doing throughout the conversation. I think Kylie would agree, like, was that really just out of kindness to the tribe, or was it also to help the private industry grow and use the tribal land with the exception they were granted? So I'm always questioning the intention, but yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Like one last question. Sure.
First, thank you very much for your presentation. I think all of you have done a great work. I'm just curious as to how do helicopter flights exactly reduce inequality, and if this inequality is within the community of Native American people, or
It's hard to understand. Sorry, can you? Yeah.
Closer.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was gonna say, yeah. So the helicopter flights, do they reduce inequality within the community, or how do they reduce inequality?
Yeah, I think we wanted to note that because, as I mentioned, the original exception for the Hualapai tribe was put in place to reduce some of that economic inequality compared to the surrounding community and tribes that they were experiencing. And I guess it was because that intention mostly that we determined that it was reducing some of the inequalities, because they were given this opportunity that that I guess a lot of the other communities were not given. But again, I do question that intention a lot. So based on documentation, I think there was some reducing of inequality, but I don't know if, I think more could be done is basically what I'm saying. Like, a lot more can be done. But that's how we came to the conclusion, just because the exception was passed. I don't know if you want to say any more.
That's fine.
Great. So if you have any more questions for them, did you want to ask one quickly, Chuck? And then we'll continue discussions outside.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. I want to ask you how you're going to handle in your final analysis and recommendations the trade-off concept, which is obviously fundamental to sustainability, and trade-offs in lots of your situations were federal land exchange, where land goes from public ownership to private ownership. And that whole principle behind it is you can find equivalencies in conservation values of some land versus other lands, and hopefully a net increase in conservation values. I debate whether you can equate conservation values, but when you get to Indigenous peoples' cultural heritage, I don't think there are trade-offs possible. And that's why I'm asking you, because you've talked to a lot of people. And the little glimmer you've given us is the Navajo situation, where you had allotments and individuals in the tribe actually benefited financially. That's set against the cultural historical value to the group, the Navajo Nation and all the people. How are we going to move forward in making trade-offs when some seem impossible to make? Or is there an opening we can find?
Yeah, very important question. And I would like to give it back to you, first one. I mean, that is, I think, the start of a whole discussion. And yeah, perhaps someone else want to react on that. Because I'm also curious what you think about that. I mean, Someone wants to jump in here?
Okay, yeah, and then we'll wrap up and we can continue it later.
Well, I think what you're embarking on is looking at individual rights versus institutional or group rights. And I think we have a long way to go in thinking about all the trade-offs we get involved with and how they infect individuals versus the group, and where we draw the lines. I don't have a simple answer. We would not have to have this meeting if there were one. But thank you for opening that door.
Yeah, I think there is no simple answer, but perhaps some ideas or also some inspiration also for me to finish that work. Because yeah, these are the really difficult questions now.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up there, and please hang around.
I think there was one more question from Joanne.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you for your presentation, and I have one question. What's the time periods about this case studies? Because I think there may be trade-off between different sustainable goals in short term. Maybe as time goes back, the relationship between the goals can become a win-win solutions.
So you mean the different time? Yeah, so that is also interesting. In particular, I would say for the Chaco case, when we think about the Chaco Canyon case, all these different times which come together now. On the one hand, the ruins, which are more than 1,000 years ago. And then also, I mean, how much does it make sense still to lease oil for land for oil and gas when we think in a longer time? And this is also such a short-term thinking also. And so there are trade-offs also between different time perspectives, let's say. Yes, that's absolutely right. We didn't integrate that now here. And this is also for the Pinyon Plain mine, which just started, as Emmeline mentioned, in December. It started to operate, and it will only operate for 28 months. And does that make sense? And it's really a very small amount of ore which they will extract in compared to in general, the demand in the US. And does that make sense because of operating a mine for 28 months and to pollute perhaps the aquifer of the Havasupai tribes in that short term? And things of times are really important here. And that's right, we did integrate it here. That's a good comment. Yeah, there are a lot of trade-offs on different levels, let's say also government levels, but also locally and globally, and then of course in the time perspective. And therefore it is very complex, yeah.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for being here. Let's give another round of applause to all the speakers. Kudos to Emmeline. I think it's very early in Sydney right now. And our next speaker is Jose Lobo on February 7th. So we hope you all can be here then. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I want to say only very quickly, because it's my last time to some of you to see you. And it's really nice that you took the time. And it was such a great time here at ASU, and also a wonderful journey for me here, and with all of my great colleagues, which are more clustered here and that. my group around Marco Janssen, and then Mike Spoon is already, but Rebecca is also there. Yeah, it's a little bit all over, and then so yeah, also there. So it was such a great time, and I enjoyed it very much. And then also, again, thank you for coming, my neighbors, and Luke for my fitness. All of you really make that journey happen, and that I'm so happy that I could come here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to future collaborations with you, or to be still friends together. Thank you very much to all of you, and my students, of course.